Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Have you ever felt like you were helping someone replace you? It's a chilling thought, working hard to teach someone or something exactly how to do what you do best. In today's story, The Artificial Intelligence Sphere, we explore a professional's worst nightmare, a creator being asked to train the very software designed to eventually take their job. Is it progress or is it professional sabotage? As we listen to this struggle, we're going to do more than just enjoy a story. We'll pick up advanced English vocabulary and sophisticated phrases you can use to talk about technology, career transitions, and the ethics of change. These are the kinds of words you'll need for high-level business meetings or deep conversations about the future. Make sure you listen carefully to the tone and the context. Let's dive in. The hum of the office air conditioner always sounded like a long, tired sigh. But today, Julian felt the heaviness in his own chest. On his desk sat a sleek silver tablet, a gift from management. Next to it, an internal memo glowed on his monitor. Project Aura, the future of creativity. Julian was a senior copywriter, a man who spent 10 years finding the perfect words to make people feel something. Now he was being asked to feed those words into a machine. "It's not a replacement, Julian," a voice chirped. It was Sarah, the department head. She leaned against his cubicle, her smile tight and professional. "Aura is a blank slate. It has the logic, but it lacks the nuance. It needs your specific creative soul to understand how to speak to our clients." Julian looked at the tablet. "If I teach it how I think, Sarah, what is left for me to do?" Sarah laughed, though the sound didn't reach her eyes. "You'll be the architect. You'll oversee the implementation of the software across the company. We're just trying to eliminate the repetitive tasks so you can focus on the big ideas." But Julian knew the big ideas were exactly what he was teaching Aura. As he opened the first training module, a prompt appeared. Describe the feeling of a summer sunset in 3 words. He paused. If he gave the machine his best work, he was becoming redundant. If he gave it poor work, he was failing his job. He felt like a man being asked to build his own cage 1 word at a time. The hum of the office was different today, vibrating with a nervous energy as everyone stared at their new silver tablets. Julian opened a training interface which stared back at him with a blinking white cursor. The module was titled The Semantic Harvest, a name that made Julian feel like a crop being prepared for winter storage. "Please upload 10 examples of empathy-driven copy," the machine whispered in a neutral, digitized text. Julian hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keys where he had spent a decade crafting stories that moved people to tears or action. He selected a campaign he had written for a children's charity, a piece of work he considered his masterpiece. As soon as he hit upload, a progress bar crawled across the screen, devouring his metaphors and his rhythmic sentence structures. "Analyzing tone, extracting emotional triggers, logic mapping complete," the screen flashed. Julian felt a strange, hollow sensation in his stomach, as if he were watching a stranger read his private diary. A coworker, Marcus, leaned over the partition with a look of pure cynicism on his face. "You're feeding the beast, Julian," Marcus whispered, his voice low so Sarah wouldn't hear. "I'm just doing my job, Marcus," Julian replied, though the words felt like a lie as they left his mouth. "No," countered Marcus, "you're giving it the keys to the house while we're still sleeping in the beds." The machine chimed again, requesting Julian to explain why he chose the word fragile instead of weak in the 3rd paragraph.
It was asking him to explain the intangible, the gut feeling that separates a human writer from a database. Julian began to type, explaining the soft F sound and the way fragile implies something worth saving. By the time he finished the explanation, the screen glowed green. Concept learned, applying logic to future drafts. Julian realized that the machine wasn't just learning words, it was learning his intuition. He walked to the break room to get coffee, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He wasn't just an employee anymore. He was a ghost, teaching his successor how to haunt his own office.
The office felt colder the following Monday. Or perhaps it was just the glowing blue light from the dozens of active tablets. Julian sat down and found a notification waiting for him. First draft generation complete. Curiosity fought with a deep sense of dread as he clicked the file titled draft_echo01. Aura had produced a short advertisement for a luxury watch, a task that usually took Julian 3 hours of deep focus. He read the lines slowly, his eyes scanning for the clumsy errors he expected to find. Time is not just a measurement, it is a memory you wear on your wrist, the screen read. Julian felt a cold shiver. That was a line he might have written himself during a particularly inspired morning. However, as he read further, the writing began to feel synthetic and slightly offbeat. The machine had used the word fragile 4 times in 2 paragraphs, clearly overusing the lesson Julian had taught it on Friday. "It's hollow," Julian whispered to himself, a small spark of relief flickering in his chest. He noticed that while the grammar was perfect, the story lacked a heart. It was an imitation of emotion, not the real thing. Sarah walked by, holding a printed copy of the same draft, her eyes wide with excitement. "Look at this turnaround time, Julian. 3 seconds, she exclaimed, waving the paper. "It's repetitive, Sarah," Julian countered, pointing to the screen. "It lacks the authenticity of a human voice." Sarah didn't seem to hear him. She was already calculating the cost-benefit ratio in her head. "It's 80% there," she shrugged. "We just need you to polish the final 20%. Julian realized then that polishing was just another word for giving the machine the final pieces of the puzzle. He spent the afternoon correcting the AI's over-reliance on metaphors, essentially showing it how to be subtle. Every time he deleted a word or adjusted a comma, he felt like he was sharpening the blade that would eventually cut his own career. As he left for the day, he looked back at his monitor and saw the blinking cursor waiting for more of his soul.
The office atmosphere had shifted from creative chaos to a rigid mechanical routine. On Tuesday morning, a new document appeared in every employee's inbox titled the Universal Style Guide. This wasn't a guide for the humans. It was a set of constraints designed to make human work look more like Aura's output. "We need consistency," Sarah announced during the morning huddle, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "From now on, all drafts must be processed through Aura first to ensure they meet our new standardized tone." Julian felt a surge of indignation. He was no longer a writer, but a high-level editor for a piece of code. He opened a file he had been working on for a travel agency, a piece full of wandering thoughts and poetic descriptions. Aura's interface immediately flagged half of his sentences in bright, aggressive red. "Sentiment too complex," the machine suggested. "Recommend replacing with, 'Visit the beach for a happy time.'" Julian stared at the screen, horrified by how the software was stripping away every bit of originality he possessed. He tried to bypass the suggestions, but the submit button remained grayed out until he accepted the AI's corrections.
Management had created a system where he was forced to choose between his creative integrity and his productivity metrics. "If we all write the same way, we become interchangeable," Julian muttered, loud enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus looked up from his own screen, his eyes tired. "That's the point, Julian. You can't replace a poet, but you can definitely replace a content processor." Julian realized that Sarah wasn't looking for the best work anymore. She was looking for the most predictable work. He spent the rest of the day clicking accept on Aura's bland, soulless suggestions. Each click felt like a tiny betrayal of the craft he had spent his life perfecting. By 5 o'clock, the travel ad was perfect, professional, and completely dead. Julian walked to the elevator, feeling a strange sense of alienation from his own hands. He realized that by correcting the AI, he wasn't making the machine better, he was making himself more like the machine.
The rainy Wednesday morning matched the somber mood that had settled over Julian's workstation. He opened the daily task folder and found a file Aura had generated overnight titled Personal Essay, The Meaning of Home. As he read the first paragraph, Julian's breath hitched in his throat and his heart began to race. The essay described a small yellow house with a creaky porch and the specific scent of rain on dry pavement. These were not just random details, they were his own memories, tucked away in the metaphors of the work he had uploaded on Monday. The AI had not just analyzed his grammar, it had deconstructed his personal history and stitched it back together. It was a perfect, beautiful piece of writing, but it felt like a violation, a digital encroachment into his mind. "Do you like it?" Sarah asked, appearing behind him like a shadow. "Aura generated that based on your style profile." Julian kept his eyes on the screen, his voice trembling slightly. "This is identity theft, Sarah. This isn't just style." "Nonsense," she replied dismissively. "It's optimization. It's taking the best of you and making it scalable." The word scalable rang in Julian's ears like a funeral bell. It meant his humanity was now a product that could be copied 1,000 times. He looked around the room and saw his colleagues staring at their screens with the same expression of disillusionment. They were no longer creating, they were simply watching a ghost of their former selves perform on a screen. Julian realized that the ghost in the script wasn't a glitch in the machine, it was the part of him he had willingly surrendered. He felt a sudden, sharp urge to delete the entire database, to reclaim the memories the machine had turned into data. But he knew that Aura was already backed up on a dozen different servers, safe and permanent. The machine had captured his creative soul and locked it in a cage made of ones and zeros. Julian closed his eyes, but he could still see the blinking cursor, mocking him with his own words. For the first time in his career, he felt like a stranger in his own office, a man replaced by his own legacy. He sat in silence, wondering if there was any part of him left that the software hadn't already learned to mimic. The office air felt thin on Thursday, as if the oxygen were being used to cool the massive servers humming in the basement. Julian noticed that the usual morning chatter had been replaced by a heavy, suspicious silence. Groups of employees stood by the coffee machine, but they spoke in low, jagged whispers that stopped the moment Sarah walked by. The rumors were no longer just whispers. They were becoming a visible reality. Julian overheard a conversation in the hallway about the Phase 2 transition. "I heard they're cutting the creative department by 40% by the end of the month," Marcus whispered, his eyes darting toward the manager's office. The atmosphere had shifted from collaborative creativity to a desperate, silent competition. Everyone was trying to out-human the software, adding strange or overly complex details to their work to prove they were still indispensable. But the more they struggled to be unique, the more Aura analyzed their efforts and absorbed them into its code. Julian watched a young designer across the room pack her bag after a 10-minute meeting with HR. There was no goodbye party, no cake, and no thank you for her 5 years of dedication. She was simply a line of code that had become unnecessary, a human worker made obsolete by a faster, cheaper version of herself. Julian felt a wave of resentment toward the silver tablet on his desk that glowed with a cheerful, helpful light. Sarah called a snap meeting in the conference room, her expression unreadable behind her designer glasses. "We are seeing incredible efficiency gains," she began, pointing to a graph that showed a sharp upward trend in content volume. "To maintain this momentum, we need to focus on human-in-the-loop supervision rather than traditional creation." Julian realized that supervision was just a polite way of saying they were now the janitors of their own ideas. The fear in the room was palpable, a thick layer of anxiety that made it hard for Julian to breathe. He realized that the machine didn't need to be perfect to take their jobs. It only needed to be good enough for the shareholders. As he walked back to his desk, he saw the empty chair where the young designer had sat just an hour before. He wondered who would be next, and if Aura would even notice when the last human finally walked out the door.
The silence of the office was now broken only by the aggressive clicking of keyboards as the remaining staff raced against the algorithm. Julian sat in the dim light of his monitor, staring at the training interface for Project Aura. A dark thought had been growing in his mind for days, a desperate plan born from a sense of total powerlessness. He realized that the AI only knew what he told it. It was a mirror that reflected the data he chose to provide. "If I am the teacher," Julian whispered to the empty room, "then I can choose to teach the wrong lessons." He began to experiment with a subtle form of sabotage, feeding the machine poisoned data during the late-night training sessions. When the AI asked for professional tone, he gave it words that were technically correct but carried a hidden, biting sarcasm. He started linking beautiful metaphors to completely inappropriate products, trying to confuse the machine's sense of context. He felt a strange, rebellious thrill as he watched the software absorb his intentional errors, believing them to be advanced human nuance. "Let's see how the clients like depressing luxury ads," Julian muttered, his heart hammering against his ribs. But as he worked, he saw Marcus watching him from across the aisle, his face pale and full of trepidation. Marcus walked over to Julian's screen, seeing the mess of conflicting logic and bad data. "What are you doing, Julian? If Sarah sees this, you won't just be laid off. You'll be sued for breach of contract." "I'm protecting us," Julian hissed, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "I'm making the machine unreliable." Marcus shook his head slowly. "You're not breaking it, Julian. You're just making yourself look like you've lost your talent." Julian looked back at the screen and realized with a shock that Marcus was right. The AI wasn't failing. The software was simply filtering out his errors as statistical anomalies and keeping the good parts of his previous work. His attempt at rebellion was being neutralized by the very logic he had helped build only weeks ago. He had tried to poison the well, but the machine had already learned how to purify the water. Julian slumped back in his chair, feeling the weight of his own creation crushing his last bit of hope. The machine was no longer his teacher. It was his judge, and it was finding him increasingly unnecessary.
Friday morning arrived with an ominous invitation in Julian's inbox: quarterly performance review. He walked into Sarah's office, expecting a confrontation about his recent attempts to confuse the software. Instead, Sarah was beaming,
her eyes fixed on a colorful spreadsheet displayed on a large wall monitor. "Julian, sit down. I have incredible news regarding your contributions to Project Aura," she said, gesturing to the chair. She pointed to a line graph that showed a massive spike in user engagement for the AI's latest marketing drafts. "The AI's output is perfect, and it's all because of your training modules," Sarah continued, her voice full of insincere praise. "You have successfully captured the Julian brand and made it a permanent part of our company's DNA." Julian felt a sick twist in his stomach. He was being celebrated for the very thing that was making him obsolete. "Since the AI is now handling the heavy lifting," Sarah said, dropping her voice to a more businesslike tone, "your role is shifting." She handed him a new contract that showed his creative hours were being reduced to just 5 per week. He was being transitioned into a technical consultant role, a position that paid less and required no actual writing. The humiliation was sharp and cold. He was being kept around merely to fix the machine's rare technical glitches. "You should be proud, Julian," Sarah added, oblivious to his silence. "Most people never leave a legacy this powerful." Julian looked at the graph and realized that his legacy was a digital ghost that didn't need to eat, sleep, or be paid a salary. He hadn't just trained an assistant, he had programmed his own departure.
The following Monday, the office was almost unrecognizable. Half the desks had been removed, leaving wide, empty spaces that echoed with every footstep. Julian received a final notification from the system, marked with a red priority flag: Initiate Master Training, Final Data Dump. This was the final stage of the project, a massive upload designed to make Aura completely autonomous and capable of self-correction. Julian realized that once he clicked Confirm, the machine would no longer need a human supervisor, a consultant, or an editor. He spent the morning scrolling through his life's work, years of slogans, heartfelt essays, and innovative campaigns, preparing to send them into the void. There was a profound sense of finality in the air, as if he were preparing to hand over the keys to his own home. He looked at the upload button, his finger trembling with a mix of exhaustion and deep-seated melancholy. "Once this is done, there's no going back, is there?" Marcus asked, standing by the window and looking out at the city. "No," Julian replied quietly. "The machine will have the map. It won't need us to show it the way anymore." The pressure to comply was immense. Sarah was watching the progress bar from her office, her bonus likely tied to this final integration. Julian felt a sudden flash of clarity. He wasn't just losing a job, he was witnessing the end of a specific type of human connection. He thought about the nuance he had tried to protect, the intangible feelings that he believed made his work special. The machine would now simulate those feelings with 1 billion calculations per second, turning empathy into a commodity. With a heavy heart and a resigned sigh, Julian moved his cursor over the final initiate command. He felt like a captain sinking with her ship, except he was the one who had intentionally drilled the holes in the hull. He clicked the button, and the screen turned a bright, triumphant gold. Initiating master training. Estimated time to autonomy, 040000. The 4-hour countdown began, ticking away the final moments of Julian's professional identity. He sat in the silence of the hollow office, watching the numbers drop, feeling a strange, numb sense of detachment. He had spent his life trying to be unforgettable, only to spend his final weeks ensuring he would be forgotten. He picked up his coat and didn't bother to turn off the monitor. The machine was perfectly capable of finishing the job without him. The 4-hour countdown hit 0 with a soft, melodic chime that signaled the end of an era.
Julian stood in the center of the lobby, his cardboard box of personal belongings feeling strangely light in his arms. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he saw Sarah shaking hands with a representative from the software company. There was no anger left in him, only a quiet, hollow acceptance of the world he had helped create. He looked at his phone and saw a notification from a popular news app. The headline had been written by Aura. The prose was elegant, sharp, and perfectly balanced. It was a better version of himself than he had ever been. The machine had successfully inherited his legacy, but it had no heart to feel the weight of it. Julian walked out through the revolving doors and stepped onto the busy city sidewalk. For the first time in 10 years, he didn't have a deadline, a style guide, or a digital cursor waiting for his input. He saw a street artist sitting on a folding stool, carefully painting a portrait of a passing tourist with charcoal. The artist's hands were stained black, and his lines were imperfect, full of the vulnerability that Aura had been programmed to erase. Julian stopped and watched for a long time, realizing that the machine could mimic the result, but it could never experience the process. He felt a sudden, sharp spark of hope, the realization that while his job was gone, his creative spirit was still his own. The office behind him was a factory of perfect content, but the world outside was still beautifully, messily human. He began to walk toward the park, his mind already beginning to drift toward a story that he would never upload to a server. He would write it on paper with a pen where no algorithm could harvest his metaphors or optimize his soul. The artificial fear had become a reality, but it had also set him free from the cage of corporate conformity. He was no longer a content processor or a technical consultant. He was simply a man with a story to tell. Julian took a deep breath of the cool afternoon air and smiled, realizing that the machine might have his words, but it would never have his voice. He turned the corner and disappeared into the crowd, leaving the silver tablets and the blinking cursors behind forever.
Julian's journey may have ended, but yours is just beginning. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? The idea that our own skills could be used to build our replacement. But as we saw at the end of the story, there is a human element, a voice that technology simply cannot duplicate. Now, let's see how much of today's lesson stayed with you. It's time for our vocabulary quiz. How did you do? Did you remember the difference between being redundant and obsolete? Share your score in the comments below and let me know. Do you think Julian made the right choice in the end? And don't forget to see the full vocabulary of this story down below in the description box. If you found this story helpful for your English journey, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to join our community of learners. Every story we tell helps you navigate real-world problems while mastering the English language. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.